timeline to redraw the county's district boundary lines and consider appointments of members to the Solano County Redistricting Advisory Committee for a term to expire upon completion of the project.
Thank you. Bill, are you helping out on this one?
Yes, I'm going to. Good morning, board members. Bill Emlin, Assistant County Administrator, and I'm here pinch hitting for Michelle this morning, Michelle Hefner, on this particular item, and I'm also going to have the opportunity to introduce our new consultant who's helping us with this effort. So should I go ahead and get started?
Yes, do.
Okay, all right. So this is the third time we've updated you over the last few months on the redistricting process, which of course I think you're all aware now that we have to complete this process by mid-December. In February, we first came back to you to talk about, sort of the changes in the law, the Fair Map Act, and the things that we have to do in this round of redistricting, which is different than that we've done in the past. So we went through that process, and also at the February meeting, we got direction from the board that you wanted to include an advisory committee as part of the process. So in March, we came back to you and provided some details and got direction from the board on how that committee would be structured and such. And so, where we're at today is to sort of take the next step in terms of where we're at in the process. We're going to be talking about some of the recent changes to state and federal legislation, looking at the schedule, and the schedule is detailed in attachments C and D in the packet, agenda packet, that I think provides a lot of insight in terms of how we're going to attack this process. As you know, it's a fairly compressed schedule, and so I am pleased to say that I think we have a doable schedule, and when Paul speaks in a little bit, he can talk more about how that's going to all work. Most importantly for today, we want to start the process of memorializing some of the committee appointments that the board members have made, and there's more to be done on that, but we hope by mid-May we have that process completed. So let's go to the next slide. So real briefly on this, we mentioned earlier that some of the macro census data came out already in terms of congressional House representative districts. But as far as the kind of data that we will need, we continue to go on the assumption that we will be getting this based on the information we've gotten, that will be in late September, although Paul may have some insights on that in terms of whether there might be some possibility that the data will be coming out a little sooner. We do have ways that we can work with data that we have and some of the data that has been released or will be released to sort of get ahead of the process as much as we can. And then in terms of the deadline is for completing the process is on December 15th. One of the concerns has been in terms of, is that the date that an ordinance is going to affect for the redistricting, or is it the date that the ordinance is introduced? And the State Legislative Council's office is opined that, in fact, it could be the introduction dates rather than when the ordinance actually becomes effective. And there's a bill from Glazer, Senate Bill 594, that would sort of memorialize that in legislation. What that would do for us, it gives us a little bit more time in terms of the whole overall process, not having to have a second reading and then 30 days effective after that. So it does give you some time. So we're going under those assumptions in terms of the schedule that we've provided for you. So next slide. So just some quick updates on what's been going on. We have contracted with redistricting partners to help us with the demographic support and the overall process, and they come out of Sacramento. Tremendous amount of expertise in the redistricting process, and we're really optimistic that this is going to be very helpful for us in terms of managing what we need to do. We've also contracted with the firm Proud City to work on the website, and talking to Michelle, it sounds like we are close to completing the website and ready to launch. There's some things, final refinements we need to do to make sure that we comply with the law. And so we're hopeful that's out soon, and we will be providing a link to that site to the board members as soon as it's up and running. And then we've been working internally with our internal team of folks, which includes folks from County Administrator's Office, resource management, IT, obviously, and others to sort of begin the technical work that needs to get done on this. So we've been having these discussions. We've obviously worked with that team in working towards selection of the consultants, and noted here Redistricting Partners, which Paul Mitchell is the owner, and he will be speaking in a minute, as well as his team that will be working on this project. Next slide. In terms of the Redistricting Advisory Committee, which the board authorized at the last meeting, and established that there would be 3 members from each district. We're hoping to have that process completed, like I said earlier, by mid-May, so we can kick off a meeting and training for those folks that are appointed by the end of May. And our goal, as indicated in the attachments that I mentioned, is to get that committee going for the months of June through August to really do the work that they need to do relative to communities of interest and helping to work through that process, and then report back to the board by the end of September. And then in terms of our consulting team and the county experts, we continue to refine the work plan, the launch of the website, as I mentioned earlier, and we're working towards updating the GIS maps and some of the software things that we need to do. And Paul can certainly fill you in on all that in a minute here. So next slide. So actually, I think what I'll do at this point, Paul, are you on the line?
I am. Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce yourself to the board members, as well as talk a little bit about some of the things that you see that we need to focus on in this process.
Thank you. My name is Paul Mitchell. I'm the owner of Redistricting Partners. There will be a whole team from Redistricting Partners working with you on this, including Chris Chafee, Sophia Garcia, who's our GIS and Outreach Coordinator. She actually comes from the Dolores Huerta Foundation, so she's done work directly with community-based organizations, doing outreach in redistricting and other activities in the Central Valley. So her experience will be very beneficial to you and to the Redistricting Advisory Committee. And then Kimi Shigetani, who is running all of our administrative and working directly with your staff, helping develop the work plan, and will be working with the Redistricting Advisory Committee. So this is a new process. It's a new process under the Fair Maps Act with regards to the number of hearings that are required, the transparency, the outreach, and the process for drawing lines. Importantly, factors like not drawing lines to advantage political parties and not treating incumbencies of community of interest, and also new definitions on what is compact and what is contiguous and all of this. So we'll be working with the Redistricting Advisory Committee to help them through a lot of that process. The Redistricting Advisory Committee is going to basically follow the work plan that we're developing with your staff, and we'll be working with them on. They're going to lead the outreach component, which includes 9 community hearings. The county, as was mentioned with the website developer you have, is going to be managing additional outreach, such as having all the presentations and meetings and information regarding the redistricting on the county website. It's actually required that that be on the website throughout the redistricting process and for the next 10 years. So they'll be working on that, also be working on required outreach to community-based organizations, publicizing the redistricting process with the media, and taking other steps that we'll be working with you on. The Redistricting Advisory Committee, a lot of people are calling it a RAC, R-A-C, but the RAC is going to have a role of giving you a report on all of the community of interest testimony by the end of September. You will still then have required meetings that you have to do to adopt draft plans, have those draft plans be published and on your website for 7 days before they can be discussed in a public hearing, and then ultimately vote on a final plan. And your vote on a final plan has to be on a plan that's been publicized as a draft plan for 7 days so the community can have an opportunity for input. There were some earlier mentions of some little subtopics that I'll touch on real quickly. First off, the census data. The census data in this decade has really been marred by a lot of delays and changes and problems with having to conduct the census in the COVID era. We just received the national apportionment data, which is a good sign that they finally met and actually beat a deadline. They've given themselves a deadline of April 30th. So that's a positive sign. The deadline that they have for the final redistricting data set, which is called the PL 94171, it's a technical data set used for redistricting. Their deadline for that is September 30th. And the process that is required in California now is that the statewide database managed at UC Berkeley will receive that data set. They will adjust that data set for prison population, moving any state correction facility population out of the census blocks where they're incarcerated and putting them back into the census blocks they were living in before they were arrested, and then producing a new modified version of that data set for the purposes of redistricting. When counties and cities receive that data set, they still can't draw lines for 21 days. So there's still a 21-day period where the public can use that data, but the county and cities can't. So we look at a timeline with the traditional PL 94171 file as taking us into, October, November, when we can actually do real work. There is one good bit of news, and that is that the census now says that they're going to get out a raw version of that data in mid-August, and that could potentially buy us 4, maybe 5 weeks of additional time, allow the UC Berkeley statewide database to get started earlier in that prison population adjustment, and hopefully get us data in a more reasonable time. The other part of the deadline is when the maps have to be adopted. As was said, the adoption of the ordinance the first time is what is operative, and the current law says December 15th. Legislative staff is working in kind of 2 different silos right now. One looking at the statewide redistricting timeline, and another looking at the local redistricting timeline. And there's an expectation that these might be modified maybe by a week or 2 or 3, giving a little bit more time to both the state and the local governments. But of course, with anything having to do with kind of this legislative path, nothing's really set in stone. But you might have to be a little bit flexible in our thinking about when we're going to be able to get started and when we're going to have to be finished. We should know more about that in the coming month or so. And with that, I think there's one more slide.
And Paul, I can take that one.
Yep.
Yeah. So, in conclusion, today what we're hoping the board will do is, number 1, is to approve the appointment of the committee members that were listed out on attachment B. And we know that's not the entire filling out the roster of the committee, but it's a first foray. And then we expect, hopefully, the next meeting or 2 that we'll have the rest of those available for the board to memorialize. And then secondly, obviously we want you to take a look at the schedule that we put together, timeline and the hearing schedule, and we're hoping that the board finds that satisfactory and would affirm that today as well. So with that, closed staff presentation and available for questions and comments.
Any comments from the board?
Yeah, John?
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah. I would not recommend we approve any of the committee members till we have the whole list, so I'd like to carry that over to the next meeting. Certainly we'll move that we affirm the redistricting. But on the, I see it shows up to 10 meetings. I'd like to recommend that we have 9 meetings, that we have 10 meetings, 2 in each district, and have some criteria for those meetings, like close to public transit and, various criteria, so that we really make sure that we have total access to those meetings. And so it's well thought out as to where those meetings are held.
John, are you talking?
I was talking.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Erin.
Thank you. I would second Supervisor Sparing's motion, but I think what I mean, I added my concerns about meetings and ensuring that there are meetings scheduled for evenings or weekends when most people can attend, or on this type of a platform that people seem to have access to. The meetings you're talking about, Mr. Mitchell, are just for the initial phases, correct? And then, like you stated, there are going to be other public meetings that the county is going to have to hold prior to adoption by December 15th.
Yeah, so there's a requirement under the Fair Maps Act that you have 4 outreach hearings and then 1 meeting to adopt the final plan. The work of the advisory committee, they could have 30 meetings, but they only count for 2 of those. So no matter how many meetings the advisory committee has, you still have to do 2 outreach hearings where you're having the public give feedback on potential draft plans, and then you have to adopt a plan at a hearing where that map's been public for 7 days. It's possible that that 4th and 5th hearing can be somewhat combined. If at the 4th hearing you're only looking at plans that have been public for 7 days. But yeah, the board is still going to have public meetings.
So then the meetings of the Redistricting Advisory Committee or the RAC 2021 are public meetings, is that correct?
Yeah, they're public hearings, but they can be staff-led. They don't need to have, obviously, the board.
Okay, and then I want to share with my colleagues the 3 individuals I put forward. None of them reside in the small postage stamp that I have of unincorporated in my district. It's primarily urban in the city of Vallejo, but they all represent communities of concern. So I just wanted to be upfront and transparent about that with my fellow board members.
We'll give you a waiver.
Thank you, because they're going to be excellent.
So let me clarify, let me clarify that, and we're happy to make it 10 supervisors sparing in terms of the redistricting advisory committee. We talked about 9 specifically so that there's 1 in every city, and then 1 up county and 1 down and 1 kind of mid county for the unincorporated area, so you capture the agricultural community. Was kind of the thought process. 2 in every district will be a challenge for Erin, probably in terms of the size of her district, but we can figure that out if that's what the board would like. Most of what we had envisioned based on COVID-19 would be night, weekend, but more of a virtual. We also have had kind of an initial conversation about the concept that, because I know we've had a couple board members ask that their appointees were worried about time commitment, that we would allow the district advisory committee, when they get in their first meeting to kind of get organized, to decide whether they want to participate in every one of those meetings or whether they want to kind of regionalize, since the primary focus for them is to help us identify communities of interest and engage them and get feedback that they're going to provide to you. So there will be a little bit of organizing that we will do with that group, and so the sooner that we have their names, the better. And so that's how we got from 9. We're happy to do some in person if we're going to be allowed to do that. That's just kind of a question that we have right now.
John?
Yes, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Brichetta. I was more concerned about the criteria which those meetings would be held more than number 10. I assumed we would be holding 1 in the city. At least I was hoping my district would be 1 in the city and then 1 in the unincorporated. So, that's how I would see, that district. But, I just want to make sure there's good public access, there's evening meetings, just those types of things I would like staff to consider. And so that we have a clear understanding of what that criteria is. That it isn't just some meetings are held at certain times in different places and stuff, just to have it where it's uniform.
Okay.
Through the chair, Monica.
Yes,
Is
Monica.
the duration of each of these meetings roughly 2 hours? Because that's, I did not know how this was all going to pan out, which is why I did not submit any names yet, just because of the commitment and because of COVID. So I like the idea that it's Zoom. Is the assumption then that each person picks the 2 that they want to attend, or would it be the 2 in the specific district that they represent? I need some sort of clarification, or can they attend all 9? I kind of need some understanding here.
So I think it's safe to assume they could attend all of them if they chose to. If they're virtual, it will be easy. If they're not virtual, then they'll be traveling. What I'm hearing from the board, which is what your technical group discussed with our consultants, was the need to have some in the daytime, some in the evening, and some on the weekends, similar to what your legal requirement is for the 4 hearings the Board of Supervisors has to have, since you'll be taking the comment on the maps. That way, we would make ourselves available to individuals who couldn't come during a daytime or an evening wasn't convenient. So it'll be up to them whether they want to participate in all 10. It sounds like 10 if the board agrees. Or maybe you give us some latitude and you say it's a minimum of 9 and you let that group decide how many meetings they want to have. I'm hoping, from a public, having done a lot of outreach meetings in my career, and Bill as well, I'm hoping that an hour and a half to 2 hours is long enough. That's a long time for people to sit and provide comment, especially since you're going to have a website where they can submit written comment. You're going to have a tool sitting on that website where they can submit draft maps and opportunities for them as we come back to the board for individuals to provide comment as well. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. The most important part is us being able to capture that information and put it in a report for your consideration.
And the website would have the community of interest questionnaire, so that if people didn't want to necessarily attend a meeting, they could go to the website and fill out a community of interest questionnaire.
That's Paul's recommendation. I see him nodding his head.
Okay, I think that's what I want. Yeah, okay. I'm not sure about during the day, but if we have to do some during the day, that's fine. As we get back into what is perceived the post-COVID-19 normal, there might be more people working during what would be considered like an 8 to 5, but I understand if we need to make that happen.
Erin?
Thank you. Yeah, I think what would be helpful is to be informed by our committee appointees as to, who they serve and what they feel would be beneficial as well. So I would hate to shut the door on, this is what we've decided. My concern would be going back to the broadband discussion we had earlier today in, people who live in North Vallejo and the Crest area and other socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods in District 1 and other districts within other neighborhoods within your districts, fellow supervisors, may not have good access to broadband or computers or all of that and would prefer a different venue. But I don't, I don't know what the level of interest would be. I would be I would let that sit there and have our redistricting advisory committee members make a suggestion going forward, whether we do in person at all or strictly online or Zoom. But I do know that is challenging in my district.
So Erin, with that thought, could we provide some computers in the libraries for people who don't have access?
Well, but again, libraries have to be near where people live, and that would capture downtown people in the district, but not necessarily folks who live out near American Canyon or in, like I said, in the Country Club Crest area. It would be challenging to get to potentially. But again, I think there's a reason why we are picking and choosing the representatives on our committees, and that is because they do represent the people that will be affected by a redistricting effort. And so I know one of my members was a part of the redistricting effort in the city of Vallejo for city council districts. And so she'll be able to provide a little bit of insight as to that process.
You can always use schools. I mean, most schools we can always use schools in terms of their computer lab or those kinds of things and make it so that it's just not a county facility. I'm just throwing that out as a suggestion.
So I think what's important, which is why we wanted to come to you today, is that we get your suggestions by the middle of May, if at all possible. Supervisor Sparing has suggested that you not approve the initial amount. So maybe we'll come back on the May the 11th if we could get your names. That would allow us to convene your group and get input from them on outreach. We have put some money in the budget in order to do outreach and to determine how to best reach the various groups of interest and how to schedule those meetings. And then we plan on coming back in June and telling you what's come out of that first set of work efforts with your advisory committee. That's assuming we have your names and we can get them together by the end of May.
Any other comments? So Paul, I have one regarding the prison population. Does that include the jail population too?
No, the legislation that makes this requirement is specifically any incarcerated persons under the state corrections, in a state corrections facility. The legislature didn't believe that they would be able to get the federal government to necessarily participate in order to move federal prison population. And local jail population seemed as though it might be problematic too for reporting purposes and gathering the data. So they chose just to do the state prison population.
So how are those people going to communicate with the area they come from or their districts?
Well, I'm not sure if or how they will participate in any redistricting processes. The way that the process, the way the change functions is that they're going to identify individuals that were marked by the Census Bureau as being in group quarters at a state facility, and then utilize data from the state corrections department to essentially redistribute that population statewide. It's only going to be probably, they think, 117,000 prisoners statewide, and only about 90,000 of them do they actually have a home address for or a place of residence that's in the state. So it probably will not have a big impact on every redistricting. It'll probably mostly impact redistrictings where that county has a significant facility that they're going to be removing population from.
Well, one who has had that population counted in his district is myself. I mean, both facilities, both the Solano and the CMF, those populations have been counted in District 4 in the past. And I want to say that before COVID, I would go out there 3 or 4 times a year to meet with the groups within, and in particular the military groups that both are active in CMF and also at Solano. So I think that essentially they're going to be disenfranchised. I mean, I'm able to hear from them. They will talk to us. The VA still sends people out to them. Veteran Services still represents them. But if, for whatever reason, somebody decided they shouldn't count, and I think this is one way of making sure they don't count. But that's just a statement on my part. Any other questions? Now I'll ask if there's any public comment on this.
Members of the public, if you wish to speak on this item, please press *6 to unmute yourself and state your name. Sir, I do not have anyone unmuting themselves.
All right, we have a recommendation. Does someone want to make a motion? Jim, do you want to?
Make a motion that we affirm the redistricting and we approve the committee members at our next meeting.
Okay.
I seconded it.
All right. You're all ahead of me. Roll call.
Supervisor Hennigan?
Yes.
Supervisor Brown?
Yes.
Supervisor Sparing?
Yes.
Supervisor Mashburn?
Yes.
And Chair Vasquez?
Yes.
So ordered
Thank
by a 5-0 vote.
Okay, Madam Clerk, we'll move on to item 23.
Receive a presentation from the Department of General Services and K&N Public Finance, the county's financial advisor, as a follow-up item regarding financing options